Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's a beautiful sunny day, a little bit cold and crisp, but beautiful and sunny here in Melbourne as we're approaching spring. And so I thought I'm going to stand outside in the backyard, get a little vitamin D on my solar panel here and have a chat with you about one of the questions I'm getting a lot these days. Keep in mind that all the information I try and share on my channel is information designed to help you, but based on my direct lived experience. I'm not just someone spouting something I read from a blog. I actually did transition my career from more than 12 years in the law and then in the business and commercial side into being a self-taught coder. Today, as of this recording, I work at Google as a software engineer. So I want you to know that this is possible and that there is a path, and that's why I share as much information as I can. Hello there, welcome to my channel. If you want to transition your career into tech, or you want to become your own technical co-founder, subscribe to my channel. So today we're going to talk about one of the questions I get asked a lot, which is, which bootcamp do I go for? How do I know what bootcamp is right for me? Now, before we get deep into that, I want you to understand a few things. One, it almost doesn't matter which bootcamp you go to because all of them are teaching you fairly standard things. We'll get into this in my analysis of the pros and cons of bootcamp shortly, but I think it's very important for us to not assume that certain bootcamps are going to really be that much better only because of their name or their brand. Ultimately, you've got to choose a bootcamp that gives you the tools you need to know to get your goal. All right, it's very specific to your context. It's also specific to your budget. It's also specific to your availability and the access. Now, I personally believe that anyone, anywhere on the planet can create the resources they need to get to their goals. That's a very strong belief I hold. And a bootcamp could be one of the resources that you have access to. So let's get into the pros and cons, and let's really understand some of the things that you need to analyze before you make a decision on whether a bootcamp is right for you. On the pro side, first and foremost, the advantage of a bootcamp is that it is a highly standardized environment. You see, everybody who goes into any given bootcamp ends up doing the same things. It's exactly like a university or school in that sense. There is a prescribed curriculum. Everybody has to do it. And this standardization is an advantage because it takes away a whole lot of distraction and fluff and non-essential things, right? I could tell you some of the cons of standardization now, but I'll save that for later. Advantage 2 is that bootcamps are very structured. Again, exactly like a traditional university or any other formal, structured educational environment where you're not teaching yourself but are being taught. It's done for you. You get the advantage of structure. Because it's done for you, all you've got to do is connect the dots and follow along, right? You don't have to figure out what you need to study next. You don't have to figure out what's important and what's not. They tell you what you need to study to get to the finish line. So that structure is very valuable for people who don't know how to do that for themselves. It also comes at a big price tag, but that's the price you pay for the structure and the discipline. So that's advantage number 2. Advantage number 3 is also related to it in that it keeps you accountable. When you're surrounded by a group of people who are all racing towards the same finish line, you feel the pressure and the obligation to keep up. You are therefore put in a structured environment where accountability is key. You get tested regularly, you have assignments, you get assessed, and in some boot camps, they even kick you out halfway through or even later on if you're not pulling your weight and keeping up. That sense of accountability is important because we're not very good as human beings to keep ourselves accountable. Some of us are, and I know I had to when I taught myself to code, but I almost went to a bootcamp. I ended up pulling out for personal reasons because of financial stuff. I ended up moving from Melbourne to San Francisco and then had to come back because my finances suddenly didn't work out. But that's when I taught myself to code sitting at my kitchen table. But let me tell you that it's actually easier when somebody else forces you to do it. It's much harder to do it yourself. It's possible, but harder. And that's what you're paying for. So you're paying for the structure, you're paying for the accountability, and you're paying for the standardization. Advantage number 4 is that it will give you a set of baseline skills. Anybody who successfully completes a bootcamp program will have a certain level of baseline skill. Now, it is an open question about whether that skill is sufficient to get you your first job. I will discuss that a little bit more in the disadvantages side of this video. But for now, just know that if you don't know how to code in, let's say, JavaScript or Python, at the end of a bootcamp, you'll know a little bit about how to write working code. Maybe not enough for a professional level of expertise. Keep in mind that maybe you don't need to be a professional level coder. Not everybody wants to learn to code to become a professional. A lot of my students and coaching students come to me because they want to learn enough code to get to a certain goal, and it may not be a professional goal. Maybe they want to write their own startup. Maybe they want to get into a product management role, or maybe they just want to be a weekend tinkerer who likes doing little projects on the side and contribute to open source, but they don't want to be a professional engineer. So there are lots of flavors of possibility available for people who want to become technical. Now, on the other side, let's talk about some of the disadvantages of a bootcamp. First and foremost, it is standardized. Now, I know I said this was an advantage, but I also said at that time that if you stuck around, I'd tell you some of the disadvantages of this so-called advantage. You see, when you have a standardized system, like take any university in the world, take any degree program in the world, once they standardize it and there is some expected minimum level of knowledge that's provided as part of the course, the thing is, everybody has to do it, whether it's relevant to them or not. I know for a fact, for example, that most university degrees end up being used in the job marketplace only to a certain proportion. For example, when I went to law school, we studied a number of subjects, right? And when I ended up becoming a corporate lawyer, I used maybe 20% of what I studied as part of the curriculum in my real professional life. However, to get my legal degree, I had to do all of them. This is probably the same for doctors or for any other degree. When I did my MBA, I know that down the track, when I actually applied my MBA skills to my work, I was applying maybe 10% of what we ended up learning in the classroom. And so that raises the question of what is the relevance of these big macro degrees? I would say in today's day and age, it's faster and more efficient to get micro skills, to get the skills that you need to get to a given goal. You have to therefore be very clear on the kind of goal you want. Now, the downside with bootcamps being so standardized is that everybody is made to do the same thing so that you can produce like cookies, it's like cookie cutters. You go in and you come out and all of you know the same at the end of it, more or less, right? The advantage with standardization is that okay, so I had to pause there for a while because the helicopter was flying overhead. Honestly, that was the slowest helicopter in the world. I have no idea what sort of helicopter. It could have been an ambulance helicopter, but I don't think so. It was moving far too slowly and just sort of chilling out in the sky. Could be someone just learning how to fly. Anyway, getting back to it. One of the disadvantages of having a standardized curriculum in a bootcamp or any other environment is that everybody has to learn the same things regardless of whether it is actually relevant to their goals. And in some cases, you're actually extending the learning path with things that are not directly relevant. So you're adding more time and effort, adding to things like potential burnout or just having to waste energy on irrelevant things or things that are irrelevant to your goal. So that is a disadvantage of standardization. All right. Disadvantage number 2 with bootcamps is that it can be incredibly intense and move really fast. Now keep in mind that different people have very different learning styles. Some people learn visually, some people learn better by listening, some people learn better by being an apprentice and working with someone. If everyone has different learning styles, but you're in a standardized environment and you're moving really fast, what I've heard from most people in boot camps is that it can be very overwhelming, that they feel like they're skimming on the surface really fast, making a lot of speed-related progress, but not depth-related progress, not necessarily understanding. In fact, most people seem to feel that they come out the other end really shaky on some of their fundamentals because they have to move so fast. Keep in mind that boot camps are in the business of selling you a big outcome in a very short, compressed period of time. So their business model is based on moving as many people as they can through it fast, but getting certain amounts of results for them. But that environment is not for everybody. In fact, I've heard quite a few graduates from boot camps come out the other end and say they needed to study more before they actually felt ready to apply for the market. So that is another disadvantage. Okay, disadvantage number 3 is the price tag. In exchange for all the structure, accountability, and standardization and the velocity that you get, you end up having to pay a fair bit of money. Nothing wrong with that, because I'm a big believer in investing in yourself. The point is that because it's costly, not everyone can do it. Or to be much more specific, not everyone thinks they can do it or are willing to invest in themselves. Which is kind of funny, because everyone wants to get the outcome at the end of it, a $100,000 job, but they're not willing to spend $15,000 to get a $100,000 job, which to me makes no sense. But it is costly, and I recognize it's not possible for everyone, and it is something that you need to factor. Okay, so now let's talk about the 4th disadvantage of a bootcamp. Not only is it costly in terms of the fee you have to pay, but usually to get the results you want, you need to stop working. The ones that help you do it when you're working part-time, I've heard mixed reviews about. But the ones that are immersive and make you go all in for a while are effective in their own way. Certainly probably more effective than you would be if you went on your own without the right guidance. But the downside is you end up leaving your job. And what that means is not only do you pay the fee, but you end up having to also lose income. Now, most people make a big mistake when calculating this. They assume that it's only the cost of lost income during the time and that they'll get a job, within 1 or 2 months. It seems to me, from what I'm seeing in the statistics, that a fair number of people don't get a job till after 6 months after finishing the bootcamp. Let's consider how much income you've lost in that period. You've lost the income for the period you were in the bootcamp, and you weren't getting income for the entire period that you were applying for jobs. This, by the way, has a very bad psychological effect, because most people have not budgeted for that unforeseeable period of time after the bootcamp that it could take to get a job. So what ends up happening is people get into a psychologically bad place or a difficult place, or they're under financial stress, and then they compromise on their goals, make decisions that make them less happy as coders, that weren't actually the reason they got into it in the first place, but they just had to do it out of desperation, and that kills the fun and the joy of it. It kills their energy. So the downside of that is they end up feeling like the whole thing was a bad decision, when actually it was just not very well planned, or there were circumstances that made it bad. It wasn't that the decision was bad. They could have actually, with the right guidance, managed to do it better, but unfortunately a lot of boot camps don't have the right people to guide them in career change, because not a lot of people in boot camps who are doing the advice work are career changers themselves. So that's another disadvantage of bootcamps. The final disadvantage of a bootcamp that I'd like to discuss today is that it is kind of generic. What ends up happening is that you learn to code. But learning to code is not what makes you a professional developer. A lot of people assume that learning how to write a bit of JavaScript and HTML and CSS is enough. It's not. There's a lot more to becoming a professional developer, because becoming a professional developer requires you to compete with other people who are probably a little bit ahead of you in experience. Just learning the basics of code is not going to get you to do that. But boot camps, their promise to you is that you will know how to write a certain piece of code and build a basic full stack web application at the end of it. But the thing is, you move so fast and it's so generic that you don't actually understand how to engineer something properly or how to develop something end-to-end properly. And that's okay. That is absolutely okay. You're not expected to. But what ends up happening is, at the end of the bootcamp, a lot of people feel that they need to do top-up studies. I recently met someone who was also a career changer and went to a bootcamp. And at the end of it, she had to get into a grad program where she was trained again for another 3 months on pretty much the same thing that they did in the bootcamp. But she felt that she was actually happy about that, because she felt the bootcamp had moved too fast for her. So not only was it generic and it moved too fast, at the end of it, she ended up getting an internship kind of program where she had to do it all over again. Like I said, nothing wrong with that, but it does mean that your expectations may not match the reality, right? This is another criticism I've heard from a very good friend of mine who's also been very closely involved in the bootcamp space for a while and who helps women learn to code. She once said to me that the problem with a lot of the bootcamps is that they kind of can be misleading, or a lot of people misunderstand what the actual value proposition is, and they often don't tell you how much pre-work is required, how much post-work is required, and how much additional top-up work is required during the bootcamp program. A lot of people just think it's the bootcamp and that's it, but actually there's a whole ton of pre-work, and a lot of people just get disqualified or discouraged from that. There's a whole ton of top-up additional work required after bootcamp hours just to keep up with the class. And then there's a whole lot of post-work, not just preparing for interviews. I'm just talking about post-work to consolidate what you tried to learn during the bootcamp period. And that before and after period is what really breaks a lot of people apart, because it's not what they signed up for and it is not what they expected. So these are some disadvantages, but I really want to emphasize that a bootcamp is a really good option for many people. If you can afford it and you're willing to take 6 months to a year of time to achieve your goal, even if it's frustrating and not as fast as you'd like, do it, because the structure you get is great. The network you get could be useful. The accountability you get is probably going to be way more than what you do on your own. But it is not without its downsides. I personally believe anyone can teach themselves to code, but they need the right guidance and they need someone to help get rid of all the noise and the distraction and keep them accountable. Do you have to leave your job for that? I don't think so, but that's what we got to do today. It's either university or a bootcamp, or spend a long amount of time with a high risk of giving up, trying to do it yourself and banging your head against the wall, which is kind of what I did, which is why it took me almost 4 years of failed attempts to get there. So I hope this has been useful, and if it has, please like and subscribe, comment so that I can interact with you and get to know a bit more about your goals and how I can help you. But definitely like and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Thanks.